On May 1st, 2023, Oklahoma police made a discovery so horrific that it left an entire community speechless. In a quiet rural property outside the small city of Henrietta, authorities uncovered the bodies of 7 people. Among the dead were a mother, her 3 teenage children, 2 of their young friends, and the man responsible for it all, their stepfather, Jesse McFadden. McFadden wasn't just any man. He was a convicted rapist, a registered sex offender who had already served prison time for violent crimes against children. Despite that record, he was somehow allowed to walk free, build a new life, marry a woman named Holly Dess, and step into the role of a father figure for her kids. To outsiders, it might have seemed like a second chance. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb. On the very day Jesse McFadden was due back in court on fresh sex crime charges that could have sent him to prison for decades, he decided he wouldn't face justice again. Instead, he turned his rage inward, onto the family that trusted him, and onto 2 young friends who happened to be spending the night. That morning, deputies were asked to perform a welfare check after one of the girls failed to show up for school. When they arrived at the McFadden property, they expected maybe a runaway or an argument. What they found instead was a scene that would later be described as one of the darkest in Oklahoma's history. Inside the home, investigators discovered Holly Dess, just 35 years old. Nearby were her 3 children, 17-year-old Riley, 15-year-old Michael, and 13-year-old Tiffany. Alongside them were 2 of their friends, Ivy Webster, 14, and Brittany Brewer, 15, who had been invited over for a sleepover. All 6 were dead. Jesse McFadden had murdered every one of them before finally turning the gun on himself. The sheer scale of the massacre stunned even seasoned investigators. McFadden's decision to include not just his wife and her children, but also the innocent friends who were visiting, added another layer of cruelty to the crime. These 2 girls had simply shown up for a fun weekend with friends. They never left alive. The tragedy was compounded by the failures that allowed McFadden to be there in the first place. Back in 2003, he had been convicted of first-degree rape after luring and assaulting a teenage girl. He served 16 years in prison, but was released in 2020. Instead of living under strict supervision, McFadden was able to quietly integrate back into society. He even managed to marry Holly and present himself as a reformed man. But behind closed doors, he remained manipulative and dangerous. The warning signs were there. In fact, at the time of the murders, Jesse McFadden was scheduled to appear in court for using a contraband phone in prison to exchange explicit messages with underage girls. Prosecutors alleged that even while locked up, he was still targeting children. He had been facing serious new charges: solicitation of child sexual abuse and possession of child pornography. His trial date was set for the very same day the murders took place. Rather than risk returning to prison, McFadden made a decision that destroyed an entire family and devastated 2 others. The night before court, he gathered the children at home and sometime in those early hours, carried out the killings. When news of the massacre spread, Henrietta, a town of barely 6,000 people, was paralyzed with grief. Vigils were held at the high school, where classmates lit candles for the victims. Families described Ivy and Brittany, the 2 visiting girls, as bright, full of life, and innocent of anything except being in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The Brewer family's devastation was amplified by the fact that Brittany had been crowned Miss Henrietta Teen only weeks earlier. Her smiling face was still on flyers and posters around town, as her family was forced to plan her funeral. Holly Dess's relatives were equally shattered. They had trusted Jesse, even celebrated his marriage to Holly. For them, the truth was impossible to grasp. The man they thought was trying to rebuild his life had turned out to be the one to destroy hers, along with her children. The aftermath turned quickly to anger. How had a convicted rapist with a history of targeting teenagers been allowed to walk free and live among children? How had he been able to hide his continued predatory behavior while in prison, only to emerge and escalate into mass murder? Lawmakers in Oklahoma faced immediate pressure to tighten laws surrounding sex offender release and supervision. Critics pointed out that McFadden's victims weren't just killed by his actions, they were also failed by a system that didn't take his past seriously enough. At a vigil held days after the killings, parents, holding their own children close, openly asked, "If someone like Jesse McFadden can be free, how safe are any of our kids?" Today, the Henrietta Massacre is remembered not just as a brutal crime, but as a reminder of how dangerous unchecked predators can be when given the chance to step back into ordinary life. 7 lives ended in one day, and the man responsible will never face a jury. For the families, that's no comfort. For them, the punishment came too late. In September 2023, tragedy struck Tallahassee, Florida, when 5-year-old Missy Mogul, was found unresponsive in her family's home. At first, it seemed like a medical emergency, but as paramedics and police examined the scene, it became clear that this was not an accident. Prosecutors later alleged that Missy had been bound, beaten, and smothered, and the man responsible was her stepfather, Daniel Spencer. Missy was a bright, cheerful little girl. Neighbors remembered seeing her play outside, laughing and full of energy. Teachers at her preschool described her as curious and eager to learn. But behind closed doors, her short life was marked by cruelty that no child should ever experience. According to investigators, Spencer and Missy's mother subjected her to repeated abuse. Court documents allege that on the night of her death, they restrained her hands, covered her mouth to stop her from crying, and caused harm so severe that she could not recover. When police and medical personnel arrived, Missy's small body showed evidence of trauma that told a very different story than what her parents claimed. An autopsy confirmed the horror. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide, listing the cause as a combination of blunt force trauma and suffocation. The details were disturbing, even for seasoned professionals. It wasn't just one act of violence, it was a sustained pattern of abuse that culminated in her death. Within days, Daniel Spencer was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors alleged that he was the primary aggressor, carrying out the fatal acts of violence. Missy's mother, too, was charged in connection with the crime for helping restrain her and failing to protect her daughter. What made the case even more infuriating was the betrayal at its core. Spencer wasn't just a man in Missy's life. He was her stepfather, a figure meant to care for her, to provide stability, and to act as a protector. Instead, he became the source of her suffering. As the investigation unfolded, the public learned more about the environment inside the home. Court documents described repeated instances of discipline that crossed into outright abuse. Prosecutors painted a picture of 2 adults who treated a 5-year-old child as a target for their frustrations. The case quickly gained local media attention. Tallahassee residents were horrified, and vigils were held for Missy. Community members left flowers and toys outside the home, struggling to comprehend how such cruelty could happen in their own neighborhood. For many, the case became symbolic of the hidden dangers children can face when the people closest to them turn violent. In November 2023, a Leon County grand jury indicted Daniel Spencer on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and neglect. The indictment laid out in chilling detail how Missy's final hours unfolded, her hands restrained, her cries silenced, and her body beaten. It accused Spencer and Missy's mother of working together, with Spencer taking the lead in the fatal assault. Prosecutors have announced they will seek the maximum penalty allowed under Florida law. If convicted, Spencer faces life in prison or even the death penalty. After nearly 2 years of pre-trial delays, a Leon County judge has now set his trial date for November 10th, 2025, with a pre-trial hearing scheduled for October 23rd, 2025. The evidence against him, from the autopsy to the indictment details, is expected to be overwhelming when it finally goes before a jury. For Missy's surviving family members, the grief is immeasurable. Her relatives described her as a joyful child whose life was stolen before it truly began. The case also sparked conversations about child protection in Florida. How could a 5-year-old endure repeated abuse without intervention? Were there warning signs missed by neighbors, teachers, or medical professionals? These questions remain unresolved, but they fuel the anger surrounding the trial. As of now, Daniel Spencer awaits trial. He sits in a Florida jail, charged with one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. The legal process will determine his fate, but for the public, the verdict feels almost inevitable. When the jury finally hears the evidence, they won't just be deciding the fate of Daniel Spencer. They'll be speaking for Missy, a little girl silenced by the very man who should have protected her.
Did you kill AJ?
No, ma'am.
So are you saying you're set up?
I mean, bottom line is there's other things at play here that I can't speak on because I don't know. I would not have put my daughter out there like trash in someone's backyard and left her there like that.
In March 2015, 18-year-old Angelica A.J. Hadsell was home from college in Virginia for spring break. She was bright, athletic, and well-liked, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. But when she suddenly vanished without a trace, her disappearance sent shockwaves through Norfolk. For weeks, family, friends, and strangers searched tirelessly, clinging to the hope that AJ would return alive. But all along, the man leading many of those searches, the one giving interviews, handing out flyers, and demanding answers, was the same man who had killed her own stepfather, Wesley Hadsell. Wesley was not AJ's biological father, but for years, he had been a constant presence in her life. To outsiders, he played the part of a devoted stepdad, proud, protective, and deeply involved. But behind the mask was a man with a violent past and a disturbing need for control. His criminal record stretched back decades, with convictions for burglary, theft, and violence. When AJ disappeared, it didn't take long for suspicion to turn toward him. From the beginning, his behavior set off alarms. Police noticed inconsistencies in his stories. He seemed desperate to insert himself into the investigation, giving emotional interviews on television, while behind the scenes, he was trying to throw detectives off his trail. At one point, he even broke into a home where AJ had once stayed, stealing clothing to make it look like she had run away. For weeks, AJ's case dominated headlines in Virginia. Search teams scored woods, streams, and abandoned houses. Flyers with her smiling face were plastered across neighborhoods. Family and friends described her as the kind of girl who lit up a room, the sort of person who made friends instantly. The public wanted to believe she might still be alive. That hope came crashing down in April when investigators made a grim discovery. In a rural drainage ditch, about 50 miles from her home, they found AJ's body. The autopsy revealed chilling details. She had heroin in her system, despite having no history of drug use. Prosecutors argued that Wesley had injected her with the drug to incapacitate her before killing her. Her body had been hastily hidden, a final attempt to erase what he had done. The case against him built steadily. Police traced suspicious items found in his work van, duct tape, shovels, and other tools that suggested planning. His phone's GPS placed him near the site where AJ's body was discovered. Even his own statements betrayed him. He gave conflicting accounts of his actions, and investigators noted that he seemed almost eager to know what evidence they had, as if he could stay one step ahead. But the most damning piece of evidence was the heroin. Experts testified that Wesley had obtained the drug and used it to poison AJ. He wanted to make her compliant, but instead, it became part of the trail that linked him directly to her death. In court, the betrayal became undeniable. The same man who had cried publicly for his missing stepdaughter had, in reality, orchestrated her murder. Prosecutors painted him as manipulative, controlling, and incapable of letting AJ live her own life. He saw her independence, her going off to college, building a future, as something he needed to control or destroy. The trial was grueling for AJ's mother and siblings. They had to sit through testimony about how Wesley dumped AJ's body in a ditch, how he tried to frame others, and how he showed no remorse. Each detail was another wound, reminding them that the monster responsible wasn't a stranger, it was the man they had once allowed into their family. In 2022, after years of delays and appeals, justice was finally served. Wesley Hadsell was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict brought a measure of relief to AJ's loved ones, but no sentence could undo the pain of losing her. For them, the wound will never fully heal. What made the case so haunting wasn't just the murder itself, it was the duplicity. For weeks, Wesley played the grieving stepfather, fooling neighbors and even some family members. He used his position of trust, the very role of stepdad, as a shield. He counted on people believing that no father figure could do such a thing. But in the end, that trust became the very reason his crime felt so evil. The story of AJ and Wesley Hadsell still echoes in Norfolk. Vigils are held every year in AJ's honor, with candles and photos, reminding the world of the life stolen too soon. Her friends speak about her laughter, her determination, and her dreams. And every time, the question lingers, how could the person trusted to protect her be the one who ended her life? And he almost got away with it. Almost.
Count 6, assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder. Count 10, felony firearm. The people will agree pursuant to the plea to withdraw the habitual second notice to enhance sentence. We will also agree.
Gregory Green's crimes stand as one of the most brutal examples of why some people should never be trusted with freedom. This was not his first time killing a family. Back in 1991, Green stabbed his pregnant wife to death. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sent to prison. 16 years later, in 2008, the parole board gave him another chance. In his letters to the board, Green said he was remorseful, that he wanted to live a quiet, reformed life. Against all common sense, the board believed him. After release, he settled back in Michigan, eventually marrying a woman named Faith Green. Faith was a mother of 4. She had 2 teenagers, Chadney Allen Jr., 19, and Kara Allen, 17. With Gregory, she later had 2 young daughters, 5-year-old Kalik and 4-year-old Coy. Faith believed she had built a safe home, one where her children could grow up surrounded by family. But by bringing Gregory into their lives, she unknowingly allowed history to repeat itself. On September 21st, 2016, Gregory Green staged a scene of pure terror inside the family's home in Dearborn Heights. That night, he bound Faith with duct tape and zip ties, forcing her to sit helplessly as he unleashed violence on every child in the house. He began with the teenagers, Chadney and Kara. Green led them into the basement and forced them to kneel. In cold blood, he shot them execution style. Upstairs, Faith heard the gunfire. Bound and unable to move, she was forced to listen as her teenage children were killed one by one. Then Green turned to the youngest girls, his own daughters. He did not use a gun this time. Instead, he placed Kaylee and Coy Jr. inside the family's car in the garage, ran a hose from the exhaust, and filled the vehicle with carbon monoxide. When police arrived hours later, both girls were gone. The cruelty was deliberate. Gregory Green made sure Faith not only lost her children, but also lived through their final moments. After the killings, he stabbed Faith in her foot and face, then sat beside her, waiting for her to bleed and suffer. Finally, as if mocking the destruction he caused, he picked up the phone and calmly dialed 911. He told dispatchers exactly what he had done, then waited for officers to arrive. When police entered the house, they found Faith bound and injured, but still alive. Her 4 children, however, were already gone. The officers also found Gregory Green, sitting without resistance, as if the killings were nothing more than routine. The investigation laid out every chilling detail. The executions in the basement, the young girls in the garage, the wounds inflicted on Faith, all of it pointed to premeditation. This was not a man who snapped. He planned the massacre. He wanted revenge. Court documents later revealed his motive. Faith had been trying to separate from him. Instead of letting her go, he decided to make her suffer in the worst way possible. When the case went to court, prosecutors highlighted not only the brutality of the crime, but also the disturbing pattern in Green's life. This was not the first time he had murdered a family member. Decades earlier, he had already killed his wife and unborn child. Yet the parole board released him, and because of that decision, 4 more lives were lost. At sentencing, Faith Green faced the man who had destroyed her life. Bound by strength and grief, she stood before the court and delivered words that echoed across the room. "You are a con artist. You are a monster. You are a devil in disguise." She told him that she had trusted him, loved him, built a family with him, and in return, he had executed her children. The judge agreed, calling Green's crimes incomprehensible. He handed down a sentence of 47 to 102 years in prison. Gregory Green would never see freedom again. But the sentence felt hollow for many. The justice system had already given him a second chance once, and 4 children paid the price. The community of Dearborn Heights was shaken to its core. Neighbors, classmates, and church members gathered for vigils, holding candles in memory of Chadney, Kara, Kaylee, and Coy. Their lives were remembered not for how they ended, but for the love they carried in their short years. For many, the case became a symbol of systemic failure. How could a man with a murder conviction for killing his pregnant wife be deemed safe to release? How could a parole board take the word of a killer over the safety of potential future victims? These questions lingered long after Green was locked away again. The Gregory Green case forces people to confront the darkest truth. Sometimes evil does not change. Sometimes giving a second chance means giving someone the opportunity to destroy again. In September 2009, a household in Dallas turned into a crime scene so disturbing that it would haunt the state of Texas for over a decade. At the center of it all was Gary Green, a man who should have been a protector, a stepfather. Instead, he became a killer, leaving behind a trail of grief and questions that wouldn't end until the state carried out his execution in 2023. Gary Green was married to a woman named Lavetta Armstead. Lavetta was the mother of 3 children, and Green took on the role of stepfather. For a time, it seemed like a blended family trying to make life work, but beneath the surface, tensions were building. Green was described as controlling, jealous, and increasingly unstable. When Lavetta began to pull away, telling him their relationship was over, his response wasn't sadness, it was rage. On September 21st, 2009, that rage exploded. In a chilling series of events, Green murdered both his wife and her daughter. He first targeted Lavetta, stabbing her repeatedly in their home. The attack was brutal, and it ended with her life cut short in the very place she should have been safe. But Green didn't stop there. Just steps away was 6-year-old Jasmine, Lavetta's daughter. Green took her into the bathroom, forced her into the tub, and drowned her. In later statements, he admitted he killed her because he feared she would grow up and hate him for what he had done to her mother. 2 other children in the home, both boys, were also targeted. Green tried to drown them as well, but in a remarkable twist, they managed to fight him off and escape with their lives. Those survivors became the voices that told the world exactly what happened inside that house. When police arrived, They found Lovetta's body in the bedroom and Jasmine in the bathroom. The surviving boys described what they had seen, how their stepfather turned into a monster before their eyes. For investigators, it was one of the most gut-wrenching crime scenes they had ever processed. The evidence against Green was overwhelming. He left behind a handwritten note where he admitted to the killings and explained his twisted reasoning. In that note, he claimed he killed Lovetta because she wanted to leave him, and he killed Jasmine because he feared her judgment in the future. It was a glimpse into the distorted logic of a man who valued control more than human life. The trial in 2010 revealed the full depth of the crime. Prosecutors presented the surviving boys' testimony, the confession letter, and the forensic evidence. The jury had no doubt. Gary Green was guilty of capital murder. They sentenced him to death. For more than a decade, Green remained on death row, filing appeal after appeal. His lawyers argued mental illness, claiming he had long struggled with psychiatric issues and should not be executed. But court after court rejected those arguments. Judges pointed to the calculated way he carried out the killings, his confession, and the survival of the two boys as proof that he understood exactly what he was doing. As the execution date approached in 2023, the families of the victims braced themselves for the final chapter. On March 7th, Green was led into the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit in Texas. He offered a short statement, apologizing and asking forgiveness. Then, a lethal injection was administered. At 7:07 p.m., Gary Green was pronounced dead. For many, the execution closed one chapter, but did not erase the pain. Family members of Lovetta and Jasmine spoke about the years of loss, about the birthdays and milestones stolen from them. They described how Jasmine should have been in high school by now, growing into her own life, but instead, her memory was frozen at age 6. Lovetta's relatives remembered her as a caring mother who worked hard to raise her kids, a woman whose life ended at the hands of the man she had once trusted. The case drew national attention, not just for its brutality, but for what it represented. Today, the story of Gary Green is remembered as one of the darkest examples of family betrayal. A man given the role of stepfather chose violence over love, control over compassion, and for that choice, he ultimately paid with his life.
There is a child sitting in a chair in front of me. I walk up and I shoot them in the back of the head and kill them instantly. This was a loving father figure. He helped with her homework. He read to Luna. He fixed her door that day, the door in her closet. He fixed that day. But have I committed a child abuse? Pursuant to Michigan law, I have not.
On November 1st, 2016, firefighters in Holt, Michigan, were dispatched to an apartment complex engulfed in smoke. Tenants were rushing into the cold night air as flames spread from one unit to another. Firefighters forced their way inside, expecting to battle an accidental blaze. What they discovered instead turned the fire into a homicide investigation. Inside the charred apartment, they found the body of 5-year-old Luna Younger. At first glance, it appeared she had been caught in the fire, but investigators quickly realized the truth was even darker. Luna hadn't died from smoke or flames. She had been stabbed before the fire was set. The man responsible was her stepfather, 25-year-old Thomas McFadden. McFadden's motive stunned everyone who heard it. According to his own confession, he killed Luna because she had asked him for food. McFadden had been in Luna's life only a short time. He married her mother earlier that year. To neighbors, the family seemed typical, a young couple with a small child, living in a modest apartment complex. But behind closed doors, McFadden was known to be short-tempered and volatile. Those who interacted with him noticed his impatience and quick anger. Still, no one imagined he was capable of what would follow. That night, while Luna's mother was at work, McFadden was left to care for her. At some point in the evening, Luna approached him and asked for something to eat. It was the kind of innocent request every child makes. But instead of responding with care, McFadden snapped. Later, in a recorded interview with police, he described what happened with chilling bluntness. He admitted dragging Luna into her bedroom and stabbing her multiple times. When he realized what he had done, he panicked. Rather than call for help, he decided to cover it up by setting the apartment on fire. He spread accelerants through the room and started the blaze, hoping to destroy evidence. The fire spread rapidly through the building, endangering dozens of neighbors. Families grabbed their children and ran. Firefighters managed to control the flames before the entire structure was lost. When they searched the apartment, they found Luna's body. It didn't take long to determine the fire had been intentional. Detectives brought McFadden in for questioning. There wasn't a difficult case to crack. Within hours, he confessed. He told investigators that Luna's request for food had interrupted him, that he lost control, and that he stabbed her in anger. His words revealed no compassion, no hesitation, only a matter-of-fact explanation for a crime that made no sense. For prosecutors, the confession was devastating and powerful evidence. The case went to trial in 2017. The courtroom listened as jurors heard McFadden's own words on tape. They heard him explain how he killed his 5-year-old stepdaughter because she wanted food. Luna's mother sat through the proceedings, forced to hear every detail. She had trusted McFadden with her daughter. She had believed he could act as a stepfather. Instead, he turned out to be the person who destroyed her family. Her grief was impossible to measure. In court statements, she described the devastation of losing her child and the betrayal of realizing the killer was the man she had married. The jury didn't take long. McFadden was convicted of first-degree murder, first-degree child abuse, and first-degree arson. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He would never walk free again. Today, McFadden sits in prison, serving life without parole. He is remembered not as a husband or father figure, but as a murderer who killed a 5-year-old because she asked for food. In July 2020, 17-year-old Bernadette Walker disappeared in Peterborough, England. She was reported missing by her parents, Scott and Sarah Walker, who told police she had run away. For weeks, her face was on posters and social media, but behind the missing person appeal was a far darker truth. Bernadette had been abused by her stepfather, Scott Walker, and when she finally spoke out, he silenced her permanently. Bernadette was a shy but creative teenager. She loved photography, drawing, and spending time with friends, but her private diary revealed the fear she lived with daily. In her entries, she wrote that Scott Walker had been sexually abusing her for years. She told close friends the same. Those diary pages and messages would later become the only way she could speak for herself. On July 18th, 2020, Bernadette found the courage to tell her mother what had been happening. She accused Scott directly. For any parent, that should have been a moment to act, to call the police, to protect their child. Instead, Sarah Walker refused to believe her. She stood by Scott. Less than 24 hours later, Bernadette was gone. According to Scott Walker, he was driving her to her grandparents' house the next day. He later claimed she jumped out of the car along the way and ran off. But his story quickly collapsed. His phone records and GPS data didn't match his timeline. He could not explain why Bernadette never arrived at her grandparents'. He could not explain why his phone was switched off for key hours that day. From the start, police were suspicious. A teenager doesn't just vanish without leaving a trace. Investigators combed through Bernadette's digital life and found her diary, her texts to friends, her messages describing the abuse. She had left behind a record of exactly what she feared. The timing was damning. She disclosed the abuse on July 18th, and on July 19th, she disappeared. As the search dragged on with no sign of Bernadette, suspicion turned into certainty. In September 2020, Scott Walker was arrested for murder. Sarah Walker was arrested as well, accused of helping him cover it up. By then, detectives were convinced Bernadette was dead, even without a body. At trial in 2021, Prosecutors laid out the story in stark detail. Bernadette had lived under Scott Walker's control for years. She wrote in her diary about being frightened, about not being believed. The day after she told her mother, she vanished forever. Walker's lies unraveled quickly under cross-examination. His claims about dropping her off were contradicted by phone records and witness testimony. The jury was told that Bernadette never had a chance to escape, that Walker killed her and disposed of her body to protect himself. Sarah Walker didn't kill her daughter, but she chose to protect Scott instead of Bernadette. She repeated his lies to police, backed up his story of a runaway, and kept the charade alive long enough to buy him time. For that, she was charged with perverting the course of justice. The jury convicted Scott Walker of murder and 2 counts of sexual abuse. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 32 years before parole. Sarah Walker was sentenced to 6 years. For Bernadette's friends, the verdict brought little comfort. They remembered her as funny, artistic, and bright, someone who wanted to study photography and make something of her life. They carried the weight of knowing she had trusted them with her secrets, but the system had failed her when she tried to seek help at home. To this day, Bernadette's body has never been found. For her grandparents and friends, the lack of a grave means there is no place to mourn. Vigils have been held in her honor, with candles and photographs, but the unanswered questions linger. Where is she, and how could her life be taken so easily? On November 21st, 2014, 33-year-old Jessica Paget left her job at a daycare center in Northampton County, Pennsylvania. She told co-workers she was stopping by her stepfather's house to fax some papers before picking up her children. Jessica was a devoted mother of 3, hardworking and loved by everyone around her, but she never returned home. That evening, she was reported missing. Police quickly launched a search, joined by family and volunteers who plastered the town with her photo. Her disappearance shocked the community. Jessica wasn't the type to vanish. She had children waiting for her, a job she cared about, and close ties to her family. The fact that she had gone missing after visiting her stepfather, Gregory Graff, raised quite suspicion, but at first, no one wanted to believe he was involved. Behind the facade, Graff knew exactly what had happened. Jessica had walked into his house that afternoon, trusting him as family. Instead, he ambushed her. He shot her in the back of the head with a .22 caliber pistol, killing her instantly. Then he dragged her body into a shed on his property. What Graff did next revealed the depths of his depravity. Investigators later found that he filmed himself abusing Jessica's corpse. He stored the video on his computer, keeping a permanent record of what he had done. While Jessica's family and the community desperately searched, Graff was editing files of his crime. In the days that followed, Graff pretended to be concerned. He acted as though he cared about finding her, even joining in discussions about the search. His outward performance masked the fact that he was a predator hiding in plain sight. But the cover-up didn't last long. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in his statements. They obtained warrants for his property and devices. In his shed, they found Jessica's body. On his computer, they discovered the video he had recorded. That single piece of evidence erased any possible defense. It showed motive, intent, and the full scope of his crime. Prosecutors later described the video as some of the most disturbing evidence they had ever presented. It confirmed that Graff hadn't killed Jessica in a moment of rage. He murdered her to carry out a sexual fantasy and documented it for himself. The depravity of his actions shocked even veteran investigators. The trial in 2015 forced Jessica's family to confront those details. Her mother, who had once been married to Graff, had to sit in court and listen as prosecutors explained how her daughter had been killed by the man she once trusted. Jessica's 3 children were left without a mother, their lives shattered. Graff's attorneys pushed for a plea deal, knowing the evidence was insurmountable. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He would never see freedom again. During sentencing, prosecutors reminded the court that Jessica had been vulnerable precisely because of who Graf was. He wasn't a stranger or an intruder. He was her stepfather. She went to his house because she trusted him, because family is supposed to be safe. Graf exploited that trust, using it as a weapon to lure her into a trap. For Jessica's family, the sentence brought no closure. Her children would grow up without their mother. Her mother would live with the knowledge that the man she once let into her family destroyed it from the inside. They would forever carry the scars of what Graf had done. For investigators, the case was unforgettable. Many had seen murders. Few had seen a killer document his own crime in such detail. One detective later admitted that reviewing the video evidence was among the hardest tasks of his career. Today, Gregory Graf sits in a Pennsylvania prison, serving life without parole. His name is remembered as one of the most monstrous stepfathers in recent memory. A predator who exploited trust, killed his stepdaughter, and filmed his depravity. Jessica Paget's name, however, endures in another way. She is remembered as a devoted mother, a beloved co-worker, and a friend. Her story continues to be told, not because of what Graf did, but because of who she was. A woman who deserved safety in her own family, but instead met betrayal at its deepest level. In October of 2013, the quiet city of Delona, Florida, became the center of one of the most disturbing family murder cases the state had ever seen. 28-year-old Yesenia Suarez was a young mother of two, trying to build a new life for herself and her children, 9-year-old Thalia and 8-year-old Michael Otto. But her marriage to 35-year-old Luis Toledo had turned toxic. He was jealous, controlling, and obsessed with keeping her under his thumb. By the time fall came, Yesenia had begun seeing another man, a co-worker, hoping to escape the nightmare of living with Toledo. Toledo found out, and rather than accept it, he spiraled into paranoia. He installed spyware on her phone, monitored her every move, and accused her of cheating daily. He told her that if she ever left him, there would be consequences. Friends later said Yesenia had started to fear what he might do. What no one imagined was just how far he would go. On the morning of October 23rd, Toledo confronted Yesenia inside their home. The argument quickly escalated into violence. Toledo later admitted he had snapped. He beat Yesenia to death in the house they shared. But the tragedy didn't end there. Thalia and Michael were inside that home too. They either saw or heard what had happened to their mother, and for Toledo, that made them witnesses. Instead of protecting his stepchildren, he chose to kill them. By the end of that morning, Yesenia, Thalia, and Michael were gone. When Yesenia didn't show up to work, alarm bells rang. She had always been reliable. Her children didn't show up to school either. Her phone was turned off. Relatives and co-workers reported her missing, and by that night, police were at her home. They found signs of a struggle. Furniture was disturbed, and blood traces were discovered in multiple areas, despite someone trying to clean them up. It was clear this wasn't a voluntary disappearance. Something horrific had happened inside that house. Toledo quickly became the focus. His behavior was off. He admitted to neighbors that he had gotten into a fight with Yesenia, telling one of them bluntly that he had snapped. But when pressed about her whereabouts, he was evasive. Detectives noticed he had tried to wipe down her car. Forensic testing later revealed evidence inside, tied to both Yesenia and the children. Cell phone records placed him in suspicious areas away from the home, areas investigators believe he used to dispose of the bodies. That was the detail that crushed the family the most. To this day, the bodies of Yesenia, Thalia, and Michael have never been found. Toledo refuses to say where he left them, denying his victims even the dignity of a proper burial. For Yesenia's mother, Felicia Perez, it has been a torment that never ends. She begged him in court, pleaded with him to tell her where her daughter and grandchildren are. Toledo's response was silence. He wanted control, and even from a prison cell, he made sure he kept it. The trial began in 2017, nearly 4 years after the murders. The prosecution laid out Toledo's jealousy, his obsession with Yesenia, and his history of threats. They showed the jury how he installed spyware on her phone, how he tracked her movements, and how he confronted her the morning she disappeared. They argued that Toledo not only killed Yesenia in a jealous rage, but made the conscious choice to eliminate her children to cover his crime. The defense fought back by pointing to the missing bodies. They argued that without the remains, the state couldn't prove how the victims died, or even that the children were dead at all. But the jury didn't buy it. The circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. In October 2017, Toledo was convicted of 3 counts of second-degree murder. The case then moved to the penalty phase. Prosecutors pushed hard for the death penalty, calling his crime one of the most heinous in Florida's history. In the end, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision on death, but the judge handed down the harshest punishment available: 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Toledo will never walk free again. For Yesenia's family, justice was served, but closure was not. The absence of the bodies continues to haunt them. Her mother said that the worst part is knowing they may never be able to bury their loved ones. The case became a reminder of how domestic violence and control can escalate into something catastrophic. On October 24, 2008, Chicago police were called to a modest South Side home. Inside, they found 2 bodies, 57-year-old Darnell Donison and her son, 29-year-old Jason Hudson. Both had been shot at close range. Missing from the scene was 7-year-old Julian King, Jennifer Hudson's nephew. The murders were immediately national news. Jennifer Hudson, fresh off her Oscar win for Dreamgirls, flew home in shock. She identified the bodies of her mother and brother at the morgue, but her greatest fear was for Julian, who had vanished without a trace. For 3 days, the search for the boy gripped Chicago. Hundreds of officers and volunteers scoured the city. Flyers with Julian's face were posted everywhere. Jennifer offered a $100,000 reward, but on October 27th, the search ended in heartbreak. Julian was found inside a stolen SUV on the city's west side. He had been shot multiple times. The killer wasn't an unknown intruder. It was William Balfour, the estranged husband of Jennifer's sister, Julia Hudson, and Julian's stepfather. Balfour's relationship with the Hudson family had been volatile from the beginning. Friends and family described him as jealous and controlling. Julia had tried to separate from him, but he stalked her, accusing her of cheating and blaming her family for supporting her independence. His anger built for months, and on October 24th, it exploded. That morning, Balfour forced his way into the Hudson home with a handgun. He shot Jennifer's mother in the living room, then killed Jason in his bedroom. He abducted Julian, driving him away in Jason's SUV. Hours later, he murdered the boy and abandoned the vehicle on the west side. In one day, he destroyed 3 generations of the Hudson family. Investigators immediately focused on Balfour. He had a history of domestic violence and had already threatened Julia before. Witnesses placed him near the Hudson home that morning. His alibi didn't hold up, and when Julian's body was found, a forensic evidence pointed to him. Prosecutors argued that his motive was simple. Julia had left him, and he wanted to punish her by killing the people she loved most. The killings, they said, were the ultimate act of control. The trial began in 2012, almost 4 years after the murders. Jennifer Hudson attended every day. When she took the stand, she described the last time she saw her family alive. She spoke about her mother's warmth, her brother's humor, and her nephew's smile. Her testimony was steady, but emotional, a reminder of the real cost of the crime. Julia Hudson testified as well, recounting the abuse she suffered during her marriage to Balfour. She described his possessiveness, his jealousy, and how she feared him long before the murders. She told the court that leaving him was supposed to bring safety, but instead, it led to catastrophe. Prosecutors laid out a detailed timeline. Ballistics matched the weapon to all 3 murders. Cell phone records showed Balfour's movements from the Hudson home to the location of the SUV. Witnesses described seeing him near the vehicle, and his own shifting statements to police sealed the case. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that no one saw him pull the trigger. But the jury wasn't swayed. The mountain of evidence, combined with his motive and history of threats, was enough. On May 11th, 2012, William Balfour was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, home invasion, and kidnapping. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. He told Balfour he had committed the ultimate act of domestic violence. For Jennifer Hudson, the verdict brought justice, but no relief. She later said her faith carried her through, but that the pain of losing her family never faded. For Julia, the sentence meant that the man who murdered her son and family would never walk free, but it could not undo the betrayal of having married him in the first place. In the years since, Jennifer Hudson has honored her family's memory. She founded the Julian D. King Gift Foundation in honor of her nephew, providing stool supplies and support to children in need. For her, it was a way to transform grief into something that would keep his name alive. William Balfour remains in prison, remembered not just as a jealous husband, but as a stepfather whose rage wiped out an entire family. His name is tied forever to betrayal, control, and violence. From the stepfather who slaughtered a family out of jealousy, to the one who silenced his own stepdaughter to hide years of abuse, these 10 men represent the ultimate betrayal of trust. They were welcomed into homes as protectors, but instead became predators, leaving scars that can never heal. They are, without question, among the most evil stepfathers in history. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share your thoughts on these stories in the comments below. Which case did you find the most disturbing?